He was the most feared man in the city, a Mafia boss who trusted no one. But one night, stepping outside his own restaurant, he found a waitress crying behind the building. She tried to hide her tears, but when he asked why, her answer changed everything. It wasn't about heartbreak. It was a warning. The people he called family were planning to betray him, and the girl everyone ignored was the only one brave enough to tell him the truth. That night, the hunter became the hunted, and his heart, for the first time, hesitated. Before you begin, click subscribe and tell me something about where you live. What's the weather like today? Luca Romano, the feared Mafia boss of New York, stepped out through the back door of the restaurant he owned. It was late, and the alley behind the building was quiet, except for the low sounds of the city in the distance. He was expecting to be alone, as always, but something made him stop. He heard a soft, shaky sound, crying. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to catch his attention. He turned his head and noticed someone crouched behind the trash bins. It was a young woman, dressed in a bright orange uniform. It took him a second to realize she was one of the waitresses from the restaurant. Her name was Mia Carter. Her hands were covering her face, and her shoulders were shaking. She looked completely broken. Luca was not used to seeing emotions like this up close, and for some reason, he didn't walk away like he normally would. He stepped closer, his footsteps echoing against the walls of the alley. Mia didn't look up at first, but when she finally did, her eyes widened with surprise. Not fear, just surprise. That confused Luca. People usually reacted with fear when they saw him, especially up close. But she didn't. Her face was red and wet from crying, but she didn't try to run or hide. She just looked at him, then quickly wiped her face with her sleeve. "I'm sorry," she said between sobs, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to. I just couldn't keep hiding it." Luca didn't understand what she meant, but something about the way she spoke made him stop asking questions. He slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, then held it out to her without saying anything. She hesitated, then took it with shaky hands. Mia looked down at the handkerchief in her hand. It was clean and soft, nothing like her dirty uniform. She clutched it tightly as if it was something precious. "Thank you," she whispered. Luca leaned against the wall and watched her. He wasn't sure why he hadn't left yet. Usually anything emotional or messy didn't interest him. He had seen too much pain and fear in his line of work. But there was something about this moment that felt different. Mia wasn't scared of him. She was sad, vulnerable, and speaking honestly. He could tell she wasn't pretending. She wasn't trying to manipulate him. She was just a girl who had reached her breaking point. And for the first time in a long time, Luca didn't feel like a monster. He just felt like a man watching someone else suffer. He asked no questions, and she gave no full explanation. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, it was almost calming. Mia sat there, wiping her tears and breathing slowly, trying to calm down. Luca didn't rush her. He wasn't used to waiting on people, but something told him not to interrupt her moment. He studied her face. She looked young, maybe in her early 20s, but the sadness in her eyes made her seem older. Her hands were thin and trembling. She had clearly been carrying some heavy burden. Luca wondered what she had been hiding, what she meant when she said she didn't want to hide it anymore. He knew secrets. He lived surrounded by them, but this girl's secret felt personal, not criminal, and somehow that made it more powerful. As the minutes passed, Mia began to calm down. She took a deep breath and looked up at Luca again. "I didn't expect anyone to come out here," she said, her voice steadier now. He didn't respond. He just watched her. She seemed embarrassed now, avoiding his eyes. "I guess it's stupid," she added, almost laughing to herself. "Crying behind dumpsters on a work break." Luca tilted his head slightly, still not speaking, but something in his eyes showed that he didn't think it was stupid. She looked at him again, and this time their eyes locked. There was something heavy between them, an understanding, or maybe just a moment of honesty they both recognized. Mia wasn't just a waitress in that moment, and Luca wasn't just a mafia boss. For a few seconds, they were just two people in a quiet alley, sharing something real. Eventually, Luca stood up straighter and looked toward the door. He didn't say anything, but the message was clear. It was time to go back. He had things to do, people to meet, and an image to maintain. But before he turned away, he looked at Mia one last time. She was standing now, holding the handkerchief tightly. She nodded at him, still unsure what this interaction had meant. Luca didn't explain himself. He just gave her a short, simple nod in return. Then, without another word, he walked back inside the restaurant. He didn't know it yet, but something had shifted inside him. In that dark alley, next to the garbage bins and the silence, something had started to change. He had seen something different in Mia, a moment of raw truth, and that moment was going to follow him. As the door closed behind him, Mia remained in the alley, still holding the handkerchief. She looked down at it again, then back at the door where Luca had disappeared. She didn't fully understand what had just happened, but she knew it had meant something. She had expected to be fired, or yelled at, or ignored, but instead she had been met with unexpected kindness, even if it came from the most unlikely person. Luca Romano, the man everyone feared, had offered her silence instead of judgment. She didn't know what that would mean for tomorrow, or for her secret, but for now she felt a little less alone. And for Luca, as he returned to his world of power and crime, the image of that girl crying in the alley wouldn't leave his mind. That simple, quiet moment had just marked the beginning of something neither of them could predict. The next morning, Luca Romano sat at his desk in the private office above the restaurant. The windows were closed, the lights dim, and his focus was sharp. The memory of the crying waitress from the night before kept bothering him. He didn't usually give much thought to his employees. Most came and went, barely noticed. But Mia Carter had done something strange. She had shown weakness in front of him, then spoken about hiding something. That wasn't normal behavior around him. Luca wanted answers. He called Marco, one of his most trusted men, and gave a short order. "Find out who she is. Everything." Marco nodded and left without asking questions. Luca trusted him to be discreet. Within a few hours, the report came back. Mia had only been working at the restaurant for 3 weeks. She had no criminal record, but one detail stood out. Her younger brother, Evan Carter, had ties to the Salvatore gang, Luca's enemies. Luca read the report twice. It didn't make sense. Why would a girl like Mia be connected to the Salvatores? Her job at the restaurant was low level, and she didn't seem like someone interested in criminal life. But her brother being involved with Salvatore changed things. That could mean danger. It could mean she was a spy or a problem waiting to happen. Still, Luca didn't jump to conclusions. Instead, he told one of the kitchen staff to tell Mia that he wanted to see her after her shift. That night, the message was delivered, and Mia showed up at his office on time. She looked nervous, like she had expected this. Luca told everyone else to leave. It was just the two of them. Mia sat down in the chair across from his desk, hands shaking. She kept her eyes low, avoiding his gaze. Luca didn't speak at first. He wanted her to talk, and after a few seconds, she did. "I know who my brother is," Mia said, her voice trembling, "and I know who you are. That's why I'm here." She looked up at Luca, her eyes full of fear. "They're going to kill you. This week." Luca didn't move. He just stared at her, waiting. "The Salvatores," she continued. "They're planning something big. And my brother, he's not part of them, not really. They forced him. They said if he didn't help, they'd hurt me." Her hands were now gripping the edge of the chair. "He told me about it. He begged me to stay quiet. But I couldn't. I couldn't live with it if something happened." Her voice cracked at the end. She wiped her face with her sleeve. Luca said nothing. He didn't interrupt or question her. He listened, which was rare for him. Most people didn't speak this way to him. Most people didn't dare. There was a long pause after Mia finished speaking. She looked at him, waiting for a reaction. Maybe she expected him to yell, or to call his men, or to threaten her. But Luca just sat there. In his world, betrayal meant death. Secrets were dangerous. But this didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like a warning. He looked at her carefully. She was terrified, but honest. Her story didn't seem like a lie. She had nothing to gain by telling him this, only risk. Her brother could be punished, and she could lose everything. Yet she came anyway. That meant something. Lucas slowly stood up and walked to the window. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "How do you know it's this week?" he asked. Mia answered quickly. "My brother said they're watching you. Said they picked a night already, but he didn't say which one." Luca nodded, still looking out the window. Instead of reacting with anger or violence, Luca made a decision that surprised even himself. He turned back to her and said, "You're staying here tonight, upstairs, one of the rooms." Mia blinked, confused. "I don't understand." Luca didn't explain. He simply called one of his guards and told him to make sure Mia had a safe place to sleep inside the building. No one was to bother her. As she was taken upstairs, Luca sat back down and thought about everything. Her warning could be real. If it was, someone inside the Salvatores was feeding information to her brother. That meant the attack could be soon. Luca didn't trust easily. But something about Mia's tears and her fear had convinced him she wasn't lying. He called his men and ordered tighter security around the restaurant. Extra guards, new patrol schedules. He didn't say why. He never explained his reasons to anyone. That week Luca stayed alert. He moved carefully, watched his surroundings, and followed every piece of information that came in. On Wednesday night, just 2 days after Mia's warning, one of his guards spotted suspicious activity near the loading dock. 3 men, all armed, were caught trying to sneak in. After a short fight, they were taken down. 2 were killed. 1 was captured. Under pressure, the captured man admitted they had orders from Salvatore leaders to kill Luca that night. Mia had been right. Her warning had saved his life. That night, after everything settled, Luca went upstairs to the room where Mia was staying. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting. When she saw him, she stood up quickly. "Was it true?" she asked. He nodded once. "They came. It's done now." She looked down, unsure what to say. Luca watched her, more curious than ever. He didn't understand her. He had met hundreds of people in his life, most of them liars, cowards, or greedy. But Mia was different. She had risked her life and her brother's safety to protect him, a man she barely knew, a man most people feared. Why would she do that? She wasn't paid to care. She wasn't trained to survive in this world. She had no reason to warn him. And yet, she did. Luca left the room without asking more questions, but her actions stayed on his mind. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel in control. He felt confused. He felt something new. Mia Carter, a waitress with no power, had just changed everything in his world. And even though the danger had passed, the real question remained. Why? Why did she risk it all for him? Luca didn't have an answer. Not yet. A few days had passed since Mia's warning had saved Luca's life. The tension from that night had faded, but her presence still lingered in his thoughts. Luca had been busy, handling business matters and ensuring the Salvatores stayed quiet for a while. But something inside him kept circling back to Mia. She wasn't just a girl anymore. She had risked everything for him, and he couldn't ignore that. One afternoon, Luca made a decision. He told his driver to arrange a private dinner at a small, quiet restaurant he trusted. No guards inside, just privacy. That evening, he personally invited Mia. She looked surprised and unsure. "I don't think it's a good idea," she said softly. "I'm just a waitress." But Luca didn't accept no. He told her it wasn't an order, it was an invitation, not from her boss, but from a man who wanted to understand her better. Reluctantly, Mia agreed. They arrived separately. Luca was already seated when Mia walked in. She wore simple clothes, nothing fancy, but she looked different outside the restaurant uniform. He stood up as she approached, a small gesture of respect. She seemed nervous, but sat down quietly. The restaurant was nearly empty, with just soft music in the background and low lights. A waiter came and left quickly after taking their order. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Luca broke the silence. "Why did you really tell me?" he asked, looking at her directly. Mia hesitated. "Because I've already lost too much," she said. She looked down at her hands, then back up. "My parents, they got caught in crossfire during a fight between gangs. I don't even know who fired the bullet, but it doesn't matter. It was all because of this world." Luca listened, not interrupting. "After that, I raised Evan by myself. I wanted to keep him away from all of this. But no matter what I did, trouble found us. Evan got pulled in, first small jobs, then threats, and then he owed them. That's how they controlled him. I begged him to get out, but we didn't have the money or the protection. So I found the job at your restaurant. I thought it would help. I didn't expect to get involved." Her voice got quieter. "When Evan told me about the plan to kill you, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I didn't care if it meant losing my job or making enemies. I've already lost everything once." Luca sat back, trying to process her words. He had known people who lost things, money, status, even family, but Mia's pain felt deeper, more personal. And she still sat there with her head high, not looking for pity. It made him see her differently. After a few moments, Luca spoke. "People think I have everything," he said. "Power, control, loyalty, but they don't know the truth. I haven't been free in years." Mia looked up, surprised by his tone. "Every day, I wake up knowing I can't walk away. If I disappear, everything collapses, people die, so I stay. I do what's expected. And every part of me that used to be normal disappears a little more." He leaned forward. "I'm not telling you this to compare pain. I'm telling you because for the first time, someone saw me as something more than a monster. You didn't ask for anything. You warned me anyway." There was a quiet honesty between them now. Two people from different worlds, both scarred in different ways, sharing pieces of their truth. The plates were barely touched. The food didn't matter. The words did. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was real. As the evening went on, something shifted. Mia seemed more relaxed, and Luca's usual coldness faded. He wasn't looking at her like an employee anymore. He was seeing a woman who had survived more than most people could understand. And Mia wasn't looking at him like a mafia boss. She was listening to a man who had never been allowed to show weakness. The conversation flowed again, about small things, personal things. She talked about the book she was reading, and he talked about how he used to cook with his mother before she died. The topics didn't matter much. What mattered was that they were being honest. There were no lies, no acts. When Mia smiled, it wasn't forced. It was tired, but real. Luca noticed how strong she looked in that moment. Not because of her words, but because of the way she carried her pain. The dinner ended without any touch, no handshake, no hug. They didn't make promises, didn't talk about what this meant. But as they stood up and walked toward the door, something unspoken passed between them. A feeling that this wasn't the end of their story. Luca opened the door for her, and Mia paused, looking at him with a quiet understanding. "Thank you," she said, "for listening." He nodded. "Thank you for talking." Outside, they went separate ways again, but everything had changed. Luca didn't know where this would lead, and Mia didn't know if it was safe to feel anything at all, but they both understood that the dinner had been more than a meal. It had been a moment where two broken lives had found a small connection. And that connection, no matter how small, felt stronger than anything else. It was not the end. It was the beginning of something neither of them could yet explain. Luca returned to the alley behind the restaurant, the same place where he had first found Mia crying. This time he came alone, without bodyguards, without a plan. It had been days since their dinner, and something in him kept pulling him back to that spot. When he arrived, Mia was already there. She sat on a crate near the dumpster, her arms around her knees, looking lost. As he approached, she looked up. Her face was tired, her eyes swollen. "He's gone," she said before he even spoke. Luca didn't need to ask who. "Evan," she continued. "He disappeared 2 nights ago. No calls, no messages, nothing." Her voice cracked. "I think they killed him." She lowered her head and wiped her eyes. Luca stood in silence for a moment, then walked over and sat beside her. For a man like him, emotions didn't come easy. But right now, that didn't matter. Mia spoke again, her voice shaking. "I told him not to trust them. I told him to run, to leave the city, but he didn't listen. He said he had to fix things." She paused. "Now, I don't even know if he's alive." She looked at Luca, searching for something, maybe hope, maybe truth. He stayed quiet, listening. "You said you'd protect me," she whispered. "But what about him?" Luca looked at her with a serious expression. "I'll find him," he said simply. There was no promise in his tone, just certainty. She nodded, though she didn't seem convinced. "Why do you care?" she asked. He hesitated for a second. "Because you cared when no one else did," he replied. The words weren't dramatic, they were true. She had risked herself for him. Now he felt like he owed her something in return, maybe more than he wanted to admit. Luca leaned back, resting his arms on his knees. "You know," he said slowly, "when I was a kid I didn't have much choice about this life." Mia looked at him, surprised he was opening up. "I was 10 when my father made me carry a gun for the first time. 12 when I had to use it. There was no school, no freedom, just orders." He stared ahead at the brick wall. "They said feeling things would get me killed, so I stopped feeling." Mia didn't interrupt. "By the time I turned 20, I was already leading people. People twice my age were following me because I was more ruthless than them." He looked at her now. "I don't even know who I was supposed to be. I just became what they needed." His voice was flat, but behind it was something deeper. Pain, regret, exhaustion. Mia had no words. She just looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. She had never imagined that behind Luca's power and coldness there was a boy who never had a real chance to grow up. A boy turned into a weapon. She reached out slowly and touched his hand. Her fingers brushed against the tattoos on his knuckles. He didn't pull away. In fact, he didn't move at all. That small touch, light and quiet, hit harder than anything he had felt in years. It wasn't fear or loyalty or anger. It was human, real. For a moment, Luca froze. He wasn't the boss. He wasn't the killer. He was just a man. And for the first time, he felt something that scared him more than bullets or enemies. He felt connection. His jaw tightened slightly, not from anger, but from panic. He didn't know how to handle what he was feeling. He pulled his hand back gently, not in rejection, but in defense. "I'll handle it," he said, standing up. "I'll find out what happened to your brother, I promise." Mia nodded, still sitting on the crate, wiping her face. She didn't try to stop him, didn't ask more questions. Something had shifted between them, something unspoken but strong. Luca took one last look at her. Her face, still stained with tears, stayed in his mind. There was no makeup, no fake expression, no guard up, just truth. and that truth hit him harder than any wound he had ever taken. He turned away and started walking out of the alley. Each step felt heavy. He didn't show it, but inside something was breaking. He had seen thousands of faces in his life. Most he forgot. But this one, Mia's, was different. He couldn't shake it. As he walked away, his thoughts were no longer on money, power, or strategy. They were on her. On the way she had touched his hand without fear. On the way she had listened to him without judgment. Luca wasn't used to being seen as anything but a leader, a boss, a name people whispered about. But Mia had looked at him and seen more. That scared him. Because if she could see it, maybe others could too. Maybe the walls he had built for years weren't as strong as he thought. He had always believed caring was weakness. But right now, walking alone into the night, he realized that not caring had left him hollow. And now, thanks to her, something inside him was starting to wake up. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He was going to find Evan, no matter what. Mia's face was already burned into his soul. The days that followed were filled with silence, tension, and confusion, and neither Mia nor Luca knew what to do with what was growing between them. After the night in the alley, everything changed, but neither of them said anything. Luca sent flowers to the restaurant the next morning, simple white ones with no note. Mia stared at them for a long time, then asked one of the other waitresses to throw them away. She didn't want to owe him anything. But deep down, she felt something tighten in her chest. Luca tried again the next day, sending a message through a trusted worker. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." Mia didn't answer. She told herself it was better this way. He was dangerous, and his world was darker than anything she could handle. But every time she saw a black car outside, her heart jumped, wondering if it was him. Luca wasn't used to being ignored. In his world, people followed his orders. They answered when he called. But Mia wasn't like anyone he had dealt with before. Her silence wasn't out of pride or manipulation. It was fear, real fear. And that made him feel something he didn't like, helplessness. He wanted to see her again, talk to her again, even if she hated him. Every day he stayed away, the urge grew stronger. Then came a night when everything changed. It was raining hard and the city was quiet. Luca waited outside the restaurant in his car, watching the entrance. When Mia finished her shift, she walked out quickly, head down, jacket pulled tight. As she stepped into the rain, he got out and approached her. She froze when she saw him. "Just get in the car," he said, not as a boss, but as someone who didn't want to lose his chance. Mia stood there, unsure what to do. The rain was soaking through her clothes and her fingers were cold. Luca opened the passenger door and said, "You're safe with me." His voice was calm, steady. After a few seconds, she got in. The car was warm and quiet. Neither of them spoke for a while as Luca drove through the city. He didn't tell her where they were going, and she didn't ask. When they arrived at his apartment, she hesitated again, but followed him inside. The place was big, modern, filled with expensive furniture and large windows, but it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a place someone lived in without really living. Luca took off his coat and motioned for her to sit. The silence was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Finally, Mia spoke. "I don't know why I'm here," she whispered. Luca sat across from her. "Because you want to be," he replied. Mia looked at him, really looked. He was different here. No guards, no orders, no tension. Just a man sitting in front of her. "I think about you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Even when I try not to. I'm scared of everything you are, but I can't stop thinking about you." Luca leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "You made me want to be someone better," he said. "I don't know how or when, but you did, and I hate that I can't let you go." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The words were already too much. They sat there, breathing, hearts racing. Then slowly he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away this time. Their fingers touched, then their lips. The kiss wasn't soft or slow. It was desperate. It felt like everything they had held back was finally breaking through all at once. Time didn't exist in that moment. The kiss deepened, hands moved, barriers dropped. The storm outside went unnoticed. Everything else disappeared. They weren't Mafia boss and Waitress anymore. They were two people finally surrendering to what had been building between them for so long. When they finally stopped, breathless and silent, Luca held her close, his face buried in her neck. He had touched power, money, and death, but never something like this. Mia closed her eyes and let herself feel everything she had been running from. For once, she didn't feel afraid. She just felt alive. Later, they laid together in the quiet of the apartment, neither of them speaking. There were no promises, no future plans. Just this moment and the fragile truth between them. They were both broken in their own ways, but somehow they fit. When morning came, the world felt different. The rain had stopped and light filled the apartment. Mia sat at the edge of the bed, pulling her clothes back on slowly. She looked at Luca, who was still half asleep, watching her. Her heart felt heavy and full at the same time. She knew something had changed. She wasn't outside the danger anymore. She was part of it now. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The man lying next to her was the most feared figure in the city, but last night he had been just a man, and she had seen something in him no one else had. As she stood and walked toward the door, Luca sat up. "Mia," he said. She turned. He didn't say anything more. He just looked at her. And she looked back, knowing in that moment that this story was far from over. The quiet between Luca and Mia didn't last long. Just when things started to feel real, their hidden relationship was shaken by something darker. One morning, while reviewing reports in his office, Luca got news that made his blood boil. One of his most trusted men had been leaking information. Someone inside his inner circle had been working with the Salvatore family. At first, Luca didn't want to believe it. Loyalty was everything in his world, but the signs were clear. Too many recent moves had been predicted, too many close calls. Someone was talking. As Luca tried to track the traitor, something else happened that changed everything. Mia received an anonymous message on her phone. No name. No explanation. Just a few chilling words. "We know who you are. Stay quiet or he dies." She froze when she saw it, and for the first time she truly understood the danger she was in. Mia ran straight to Luca, holding her phone with shaking hands. He grabbed it, read the message, and didn't say a word for several seconds. Then, without looking at her, he muttered, "It started." He called his men, gave a list of names, and ordered immediate action. The traitor had made a move, and now Mia was a target. Luca didn't care who was behind it. He was going to find them and end it. That same night, 2 bodies were found in an alley. Low-level informants who had ties to the Salvatore family. Luca wasn't hiding anymore. He was sending a message. He acted with full force, searching for whoever had put Mia in danger. Mia, meanwhile, was shaken. She had stepped into Luca's world, and now the consequences were hitting her directly. Luca moved her to a safe apartment far from the restaurant. The place was guarded 24/7, and no one but him knew the address. He kissed her forehead and said, "I'll come back." "I swear." Mia stayed locked inside the safe apartment, feeling like a prisoner in someone else's war. She wasn't allowed to leave, not even to go downstairs. Luca sent guards with food and updates, but he didn't come himself. She didn't know what was happening outside, only that things were getting worse. Then one night, the phone in the apartment rang. She picked it up slowly. The voice on the other end was calm and familiar. "Hello, Mia," Marco Salvatore said. "I thought you should know the truth. Luca killed your brother." Mia froze. She couldn't breathe. "What?" she whispered. "Evan is dead. And Luca made it look like he was helping you the whole time," Marco continued. "He's not who you think he is." Mia's heart dropped. Her whole body went numb. Marco hung up without another word, leaving her with nothing but panic. She collapsed onto the floor, trying to catch her breath. She didn't want to believe it, but the doubt spread fast. Luca hadn't let her talk to Evan. He said he was protecting her. But maybe that was a lie. Maybe everything was a lie. All the feelings, the promises, maybe it was all part of some cruel game. Mia didn't sleep that night. She sat by the door, waiting. And then, just before sunrise, Luca arrived. His shirt was stained with blood, his knuckles bruised. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were still sharp. As soon as he walked in, Mia stood up. "Is it true?" she shouted. "Did you kill Evan?" Luca stopped in his tracks. "No," he said firmly. "He's alive, I swear to you, Mia." "Then why haven't I seen him? Why haven't I heard his voice?" she cried. "Because they're using him against me," Luca replied. "And I'm doing everything I can to keep you both safe." She wanted to believe him, but her heart was torn apart. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she said, her voice shaking. "You promised me." "I kept my promise," he said, stepping closer. "I would never hurt your brother. Marco's trying to break you. Don't let him." Her hands trembled as she wiped her tears. "I hate you for this," she whispered, "for making me care, for making me believe there was something good in you." Luca didn't flinch. He took the words. "And I hate myself for letting you in," she continued, "because now I'm stuck between fear and love." He stepped closer and reached out, but she pulled away. "Don't," she said. "Just don't." Luca stood still, knowing he couldn't fix it with a touch. The damage was done, and it wasn't something he could erase with words or promises. Mia turned away from him, walking slowly to the window. The city was waking up outside, but inside the apartment, everything felt broken. Luca watched her, realizing this wasn't just about Evan anymore. It was about trust, about what they had become. He wanted to protect her, but maybe protecting her also meant hurting her. Mia wiped her face and spoke without turning around. "If Evan is alive, prove it. Let me see him. Let me hear his voice." Luca nodded. "I will," he said quietly. "But you have to stay hidden until it's safe." She didn't answer. She just stood there, staring out the window, as Luca walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. "I love you," he said. It was the first time he had said it out loud. Mia didn't reply, but as the door closed, she whispered, "I love you too, and I hate you for it." The war that had been building for weeks finally erupted across the streets. The Salvatore family struck first, ambushing one of Luca's supply routes and killing 2 of his men in broad daylight. That was the final trigger. Luca didn't hesitate. He called every ally, every soldier, and gave one order: no mercy. From that moment on, the streets of New York turned into a battlefield. Safe zones no longer existed. Restaurants, warehouses, and even public places became war zones. Every move was calculated, every step dangerous. Luca was always at the front, leading the charge. He didn't hide behind his power. He used it. He wanted them to know that he wouldn't rest until every traitor was buried. Meanwhile, Mia was locked away in the safe apartment, far from the noise, but not from the fear. She followed the news, heard explosions in the distance, and wondered if Luca was still alive. Each day, Mia waited by the window, jumping at every loud sound outside. She paced the small apartment, unable to sleep or think clearly. The guard said nothing, only gave her updates when asked. But she could see it in their eyes. Things were getting worse. Every time the phone rang, she feared it would be the call that confirmed her worst nightmare. She knew Luca was out there, fighting not just for territory or revenge, but for her. He hadn't said it out loud, but she felt it. The message behind every move was clear. No one would take her from him. and yet she couldn't shake the fear that the man she loved wouldn't come back. She remembered their last conversation, the way he looked at her, the way he said, "I love you," for the first time. Those words stayed with her, repeating in her mind like a broken record, keeping her heart alive. Then one night, long after midnight, the door burst open. Mia jumped to her feet. Luca stepped inside, barely standing. His shirt was soaked with blood and his face was bruised. Two of his men helped him walk. He looked at her, and for a second everything stopped. She rushed to him, grabbing his face gently. "You're hurt," she whispered. He gave a weak smile. "I've had worse." The men stepped aside as she helped him sit down. She ran to the bathroom, grabbed the first aid kit, and returned with trembling hands. She cleaned the blood from his face, pressed gauze to a wound on his side, and tried not to cry. He watched her in silence, letting her care for him. For the first time in days, he felt peace. Not because the war was over, but because he was back with her. In that moment, she was the only thing that mattered. As she bandaged his side, Luca finally spoke. "I thought about leaving," he said, his voice low. "I thought if I disappeared, they'd stop coming after you." Mia froze, then looked up at him. "But I couldn't do it," he continued. "I couldn't stay away." Her eyes filled with tears. "Don't say that," she whispered. "Don't say you almost left." He reached for her hand. "I would have done anything to keep you safe, even if it meant walking away." She shook her head. "You don't protect someone by disappearing. You protect them by staying." He didn't answer. She placed her hand on his cheek and said, "Don't run from the thing that saved you." Luca's jaw tightened. He had been running his whole life, from pain, from weakness, from emotions, but Mia had seen through all of that, and somehow she had stayed. She hadn't given up on him, even when he gave her every reason to. Luca pulled her closer. His hands were still shaking, and his body hurt, but none of that mattered. "I love you," he said again, but this time louder, firmer. The words weren't a whisper or an accident. He meant them, all of them. "I love you, Mia." She let the tears fall as she wrapped her arms around him. "I love you too," she whispered back. They held each other tightly, as if the world outside didn't exist. For a few minutes, it didn't. The sirens, the gunshots, the enemies, they were all outside. Inside this apartment, there was only them. Two broken people who had found something strong in the middle of chaos. Their bodies were covered in scars, their hearts full of fear, but their love was real. They didn't need promises or plans, just that moment, just each other. That was enough, even if everything else burned to the ground. Morning came slowly, with grey light pouring through the windows. Luca was still resting on the couch, eyes closed, his hand tightly holding Mia's. She hadn't slept. She had sat beside him the entire night, making sure his breathing stayed steady. The news kept playing quietly in the background. More attacks, more names, more casualties. But Mia didn't care. Luca was alive. That was all that mattered to her. He opened his eyes slowly, saw her beside him, and gave her the smallest smile. "Still here?" he asked. She nodded. "Always." He squeezed her hand. There was still so much to do, so many enemies to face. But for now, he allowed himself a few more minutes of stillness. Outside, the city was at war. Inside, they had found something stronger than violence, something that no bullet could kill. Their love hadn't started in peace. It had been born in blood, but it had survived, and that made it real. Luca sat at the head of the table in his office, looking over a map of the city spread out in front of him. Red markers covered the streets, each one showing places where men had died, blood had been spilled, or control had been lost. The war had taken everything to the edge. He knew that if it continued, there would be nothing left to protect, not his territory, not his people, and definitely not Mia. His mind kept going back to her, to the look on her face when he returned covered in blood, to the way her hands shook while cleaning his wounds. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. It was about finally finding peace in a world built on violence. That night, Luca made the hardest decision of his life. He contacted Marco Salvatore and arranged a meeting, not for an ambush, not for war, for peace. They met in a neutral location, an old warehouse that had been abandoned for years, chosen because neither side could claim it. Marco arrived with 2 of his men, all armed, all tense. Luca came with just 1 bodyguard and a calm face. The tension between the 2 leaders was thick. They stood across from each other, both knowing the power they held, but both aware of how much they had lost. "I'm not here to fight," Luca said simply. "I want this to end." Marco raised an eyebrow. "You want peace?" he asked with a mocking tone. "That's new." Luca nodded. "In exchange for peace, I'll give up the north side, and I'll pull my men out of 2 other zones." Marco looked surprised. That was a huge offer. "What's the catch?" he asked. Luca looked him in the eye. "You leave Mia Carter and her brother alone, for good. No more threats. No more games." He stepped closer, looking Luca up and down. "You'd give up that much for a girl?" Luca didn't flinch. "Yes." Marco laughed coldly. "Then here's my counteroffer. I'll accept your terms, but only if you give her up. Walk away. Let her go. Forever. No contact. No visits. You live your life and she lives hers, far from you." The words hit Luca hard, but he didn't react on the outside. "You're asking me to trade her safety for her heart," he said. Marco shrugged. "Call it what you want. I call it peace." Luca stared at the man in front of him, thinking he could lie. He could. He could agree and break the deal later, but that would only restart the war. Marco would know. He was testing him, and Luca knew what he had to do. "No," he said, "I won't give her up. But I'll still give you the territory." "You'd hand over part of your empire and still keep the girl?" he asked. Luca nodded. "I'd rather lose land than lose myself." There was a long pause. Then Marco stepped back and said, "Fine, you have a deal." Papers were signed, hands were shaken, reluctantly. The deal was made. The war was over. Luca left the warehouse with less power than he had ever had, but with something more important. He had protected Mia, and her brother, now finally released by the Salvatores, was already being transported to a safe location. As Luca sat in the back of his car on the way back to the apartment, he felt a strange calm. For the first time in years, there was no war waiting for him, no one to kill, no one to chase. Just a woman waiting to find out what he had done. When Luca walked into the apartment, Mia was standing by the window, staring outside. She turned the moment she heard the door. Her eyes searched his face, worried, unsure. "What happened?" she asked. He sat down on the couch, exhausted, and told her everything, about the deal, about the condition Marco gave him, and about how he said no. When he finished, Mia just stared at him. "You lost everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You gave them part of your empire. For me," her hands shook as tears filled her eyes, "you lost everything because of me." Luca stood and walked over to her. "No," he said gently. "I gained something that money, land, and fear could never give me." He placed his hand on her cheek. "I gained you." She broke down into tears, burying her face in his chest, and for the first time he held her without guilt. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in silence. Outside, the world still spun, and the city still burned in small ways. But for them, inside that small apartment, something had changed. The war had ended not with more blood, but with a choice. Luca had chosen love over power, something no one in his world would ever understand. He had ruled by fear for years, but in the end, it wasn't fear that saved him, it was Mia. The woman who had once been just a waitress had become the only thing he couldn't live without. And now, he didn't have to. Mia pulled back slightly to look at him, her face still wet from crying. "Are you sure you won't regret it?" she asked. Luca smiled for the first time in days. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." She nodded, and they kissed, sealing what the world had tried to destroy. That night, they lay together without fear. There were no more secrets, no more battles to fight. The empire that had once been Luca's whole life was now just a part of his past. He wasn't the same man anymore, and he didn't want to be. Mia had shown him a different way to live. Not easier, but real. He had given up the throne willingly, not for weakness, but for something stronger than control. As he looked at her, sleeping beside him, he knew he had made the right choice. He had spent his life building walls, building power, building fear, and with one choice, one sacrifice, he had finally torn all of that down. He had nothing to prove anymore. No one left to impress. Just a promise to keep. He would protect Mia with everything he had left, not as a crime lord, but as a man finally free. Months had passed since the last gun was fired, since the last deal was made in blood. The city had finally gone quiet. The streets that once echoed with tension were calm now, guarded not by soldiers, but by silence and memory. Luca had stepped away from the throne he once ruled with fear. His name still carried weight, but he no longer used it as a weapon. Instead, he lived in the background, out of sight, with Mia by his side. They moved to a smaller place, nothing like the cold, polished apartment he used to hide in. Their new home was warm, filled with simple things. It had no guards at the door, no cameras on the walls, just space to breathe. Luca didn't talk about the past unless Mia asked, and she rarely did. They were building something new, something that didn't belong to either of their old lives. Something theirs. One quiet evening, after dinner, Luca stood in the small kitchen and stared at his hands. They still had faint scars from the war he had left behind. His knuckles were rough, his palms marked from years of violence. He looked down at them, then looked at Mia, who was folding a blanket on the couch. Without saying a word, he walked to the drawer, pulled out a piece of wire he had found earlier in the garage, and twisted it gently into a circle. It wasn't pretty or smooth, but it held together. He walked over to her, heart racing in a way he hadn't felt even in the middle of battle. "Mia," he said quietly. She turned to face him. "Marry me," he said, holding out the wire ring in his scarred fingers. "I don't have a speech, I don't have a real ring. But I have you, and I don't want to lose that." He looked scared, not of her answer, but of losing the only honest thing he had ever known. She stepped closer, took the ring gently, and slid it onto her own finger. "Yes," she whispered, her voice calm but certain. "Yes, I'll marry you." There were no fireworks, no shouting, no dramatic background music, just two people who had seen too much and still chose each other. Luca kissed her forehead, and they sat in silence for a while, holding hands. A few days later, they arranged everything. No church, no guest list, no press, just a small ceremony in a quiet garden owned by one of Luca's oldest allies. A friend who owed him nothing and wanted nothing in return, someone who still believed in loyalty without cost. It would be simple, safe, and most importantly, real. The ceremony took place just as the sun was going down. There were only a few people there. Marco, the driver who had stayed with Luca through everything, Elena, the cook from the restaurant, and Evan, Mia's brother, who now worked in a bookstore and barely spoke of the past. Mia wore a plain white dress. She did her own hair. No makeup, no veil, no diamonds, just herself. Luca stood at the front, dressed in a black suit that had seen better days, his shoulders squared but his face soft. As the music started, an old record playing quietly on a speaker, Mia walked alone down the path. No one gave her away. She didn't need that. Her walk was slow, steady, eyes locked on the man waiting for her. Every step said the same thing. "This is my choice. I'm not here by accident. I want this. I want him. The priest said the words clearly, without dragging the moment. "Do you, Luca Romano, take Mia Carter as your wife?" Luca answered without hesitation. "I do." Then came Mia's turn. "Do you, Mia Carter, take Luca Romano as your husband?" She smiled. "I do." When the priest told them to seal it with a kiss, Luca didn't rush. He stepped forward and held her face like she was something fragile but strong, something he didn't deserve but had been given anyway. He kissed her slowly, not like a man who had won something, but like a man who had been saved. The guests clapped quietly, nothing loud or showy. It wasn't that kind of day. Mia leaned her forehead against his and closed her eyes. "We made it," she whispered. Luca nodded, still holding her close. "We did." He looked around, breathing in the stillness. This was peace, not given, not stolen, earned. As night fell and the small group shared a simple dinner under string lights, the city around them seemed to pause. No sirens, no shouting, no tension in the air. It was as if New York itself knew something had changed. The man who had once ruled through fear was now a husband, not a king, and he was okay with that. Luca didn't speak much during the meal. He just watched Mia laugh with Evan, watched her smile without worry, watched her live. That was enough for him. When the night ended and the guests left, Luca and Mia stayed behind, sitting alone at the table. "Do you think people like us deserve this?" she asked quietly. He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't know," he answered, "but we have it anyway. And I'm not letting it go." She reached for his hand, and he held it tightly, as if it was the only thing keeping him grounded. In the heart of a city built on power and fear, something different had grown. Not perfect, not easy, but true. The man who had once walked through alleys with blood on his hands now walked beside the woman he loved, with nothing to hide. The woman who once cried behind a dumpster now stood as his equal, not saved, but chosen. Together, they had found a life no one believed possible. No headlines, no fairy tale, just two people who refused to let go, even when everything told them to walk away. Their wedding was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a life that would never be ordinary. And as they left the garden hand in hand, the city didn't cheer, didn't shout. It simply stayed quiet, as if in quiet respect for something it never thought it would witness. A Mafia king laying down his crown, not for defeat, but for love. 6 months had passed since the wedding, and life had settled into a new kind of normal. The city hadn't changed much on the outside. There were still deals, there were still names that carried weight. But something under the surface was different. The violence that once ruled every block had quieted. It wasn't gone, but it was controlled. People spoke with more respect and less fear. In the middle of it all, something unexpected had grown. Mia now owned the restaurant where everything had started. After the war, the previous owner decided to leave town and offered her the business. With Luca's silent support and her own determination, she took it. She renovated the inside, cleaned the kitchen, hired new staff, and turned it into a real place of warmth. Every morning, just after opening, Luca would come in. He never used the back door. He walked through the front like anyone else, sat at his usual table, and waited for coffee. Mia would always bring it to him herself. It was their routine now, simple, quiet, and something they both looked forward to. Luca never gave orders inside the restaurant. He didn't talk business there, didn't answer calls. He was just a customer like everyone else, though the staff still treated him with quiet respect. He would sip his coffee, read the newspaper, and sometimes stay longer just to watch Mia move around the room. She was different now, more confident, more sure of herself. She smiled more. She laughed more. And Luca, the man who had once ruled the city through fear, had found something more powerful than control. Calm. Outside those walls he still carried weight. He still had connections. But he didn't need to prove anything anymore. His life wasn't about protecting a throne. It was about protecting the peace he had built with her, and he never forgot where it all began. At night, after closing, Mia would take her time counting the cash, cleaning the last table, locking the doors. She never rushed because she knew who was waiting for her. Behind the building in the alley, Luca stood leaning against the wall near the same spot where he had found her crying all those months ago. It had become their meeting place, not because they needed secrecy, but because it meant something to both of them. It reminded them of how far they had come. Mia always arrived with a tired smile and open arms. She would walk straight to him, hug him tightly, and whisper something simple like, "Long day," or "They messed up another order again." He would smile, kiss the side of her head, and pull her close. These moments didn't need much. They were full even when nothing was said. This alley, once a place of sadness, had become a place of comfort. One evening, as she arrived and wrapped her arms around him, Mia laughed softly. "Who would have thought?" she said, her voice full of wonder. "The girl behind the dumpster and the man everyone was afraid of." Luca looked at her and nodded. "It was right here," he said, "that I learned what's real." She pulled back a little to look at him. "Real?" she repeated. He nodded again. "All my life I thought power was everything. But that night, when you cried and didn't flinch when you saw me, I saw something different. You weren't afraid. You were just honest." Mia's eyes softened. "I was falling apart." "Exactly," he replied, "and that's when I started to realize I wanted something else." They didn't need fancy words. Fancy. The quiet between them said enough. They both remembered what it was like before the peace, before the love, before the choice to walk through it all together. They sat down on the small wooden crate Luca always pulled out for her. The alley was still the same. Old bricks, a rusted metal door, the hum of a nearby vent, but it didn't feel dirty anymore. It felt familiar, safe. Mia leaned her head on his shoulder as they talked about everything and nothing. Sometimes they joked about the early days, like when she spilled soup on a customer, or when Luca scared a health inspector without even trying. Other times, they spoke quietly about how hard things used to be, how scared she was for her brother, how close Luca came to losing everything. And sometimes they didn't talk at all. They just sat, close, hands held, breathing in the quiet night. The city around them, which had once kept them apart, now felt like the background to their story. It had tried to tear them down, but they were still standing. Luca looked out over the rooftops, then down at Mia. "You changed everything," he said. "I didn't mean to," she answered. "I just wanted to survive." He smiled. "That's what makes it real. You didn't try to fix me. You just stayed." Mia didn't reply, but her hand squeezed his. For a man who had once believed love was a weakness, it still surprised him how strong it made him feel. She hadn't saved him by pulling him out of the darkness. She'd simply sat beside him until he was ready to stand. And now, every time he looked at her, he remembered the moment he stopped being alone. The alley was quiet. The restaurant behind them was closed. The city was still moving, but for them, time had paused. The feared Mafia king and the crying waitress had become something no one saw coming, a man and a woman who had found peace in each other. They stood together, side by side, looking down the alley as if it were a path instead of a dead end. There were no sirens, no enemies, no threats waiting around the corner, just a quiet promise between two people who had walked through fire and made it out the other side. Luca turned to Mia and said, "Let's go home." She nodded, taking his hand as they walked back together. Behind them, the lights of the restaurant turned off completely, leaving the alley in darkness. But for them, it didn't matter. They carried the light now, not in their surroundings, but in each other. The Mafia boss and the waitress were no longer just roles in a story. They were proof that even the deepest scars could heal, and even the most dangerous paths could lead to peace. And in the silence of the night, the city seemed to watch, and for once, smile back. And that's a wrap. I'm so glad you stayed with us all the way to the end. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the story and tell us which part you liked the most or the least. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. See you in the next one.